a week or so ago, there was a gathering of the McRae family to remember really Colin's World Championship success, the anniversary thereof. And of course, you've got the whole dynasty there now. You've got Jimmy McRae, who won, I don't know, was it 5 British Rally Championships? Alistair, and now young, would you believe, Max McRae, another Max, who won the junior European Rally Championship last year. So a little bit of footage from that. Let's have a look at this.
Max McRae here. I'm here at the Moulsdale Foundation for a day with the McRaes. So I think it's going to be a great turnout. We've got, of course, so many amazing cars here. It's nice to celebrate 30 years of Colin winning the championship, as well as Dad winning the British Championship.
Colin was already in the World Championship, and it was the question was, well, there can't be 2 of them from that family can get to the World Championship and do the same job. It opened doors, but you had to keep them open.
Jimmy, you started it all off back in the late 70s and early 80s, but you soon made your mark on it, didn't you?
First car I had was a 4-door Catena with a Lotus engine in it. I finished 11th overall. The next rally I did with the Catena, I finished 6th, then I got a 5th, then I got a 3rd, and I thought, I'm pretty good at this.
Dad he wanted us to rally, but he wasn't going to push us into us, and he wasn't going to, put it on a plate.
5 times British champion. There's one thing that, Max, I don't want you to beat that, son. I'd like you to win it once, but then you can go and do the World Championship after that, okay?
Sounds like a fair deal.
Yeah, Jimmy McRae, 82 years old. I'm sure he'll be out for the Tour of Britain as well, and I think he's getting his granddaughter to sit alongside him in an escort or something like that. Great to see the McRae family, and Colin McRae, of course, absolutely just brilliant. One of the great all-time rally drivers. Could have been a great race driver too had he put his mind to it, a bit like Henry Toivonen, although his career was obviously cut off even sooner. And I spent a very happy day with Colin in Sardinia one year, after he'd retired, or he was going through a sabbatical, I think, something like that. And actually we were in a helicopter, not his, with Dave Richards, the 3 of us flying around from stage to stage in Sardinia, which was good fun. Really miss Colin, but great to see the McRae family there. And Max McRae, definitely remember that name. That guy's going to be very good. You might have noticed I've put up on the channel a longer version of the Jim Clark onboard around Alton Park in '63 in the Lotus 25. This is the full version of the film that was made around that onboard, and it begins with the the Fulham bog plant by Wandsworth Bridge, where I used to live, very near there, which was the Esso sort of depot at the time. And there's Joe and Lofty preparing the tea for the Esso Racing Services caravan. They go up to Alton, they go to Silverstone actually for the British Grand Prix. And it's a great little video, but I just thought on the back of that, and he was watching it and he sent it on the back of that, we would do another lap of Alton Park, if I can find it here. Where is it? Here we go. With our friend Horatio Fitzsimon, who's driven a Lotus 22 around Alton Park very, very quickly, and we'll do that. But just to tell you that Horatio, I go on about him because he's a super talented guy, very, very quick. And the news from him is that he's, and it's unusual to have good news like this, isn't it? He's got a deal with Bob Neville's RJN team to race their McLaren 720S GT3 this season in the GT World Challenge Europe. So congratulations to him, and I'm no doubt he'll absolutely fly in this car. But just to get the adrenaline going before we get on with the questions, here's Horatio's lap of Alton. Doesn't take very long in his Formula Junior Lotus 22. Beautiful car. It was one of the first cars I fell in love with as a kid when I watched Leo Gagan win the '63 Australian Formula Junior Championship in his 22. Total team, black, Leo in his black polo shirt, black open face helmet, Warwick Farm. What could have been better? But anyway, here we are in the red 22 of the lap of Alton Park. Yeah, totally mega. That's not how I drove the Lotus 49 round Zandvoort, got to tell you. So yeah, congratulations to Horatio, and thanks for that. And if you haven't seen that Jim Clark video, it's black and white, but it's still got about the same feel to it. Jimmy really getting at it in the Lotus 25, despite the precarious nature of the onboard mounted on a tripod over the rollover bar, which Cedric Seltzer goes into great details about in his wonderful autobiography called If You Finish Second, You Haven't Done Very Well, or You've Lost, or something like that, which of course is very appropriate. Jimmy didn't have many second places in his career. German Grand Prix once, I think, was about the only time. Right, let's get down to the questions and comments. This is your show anyway, at the end of the day, Peter rambling on. First question is from, I tell you what I'm going to do though. I'm just going to go to my chat box thing and I'm going to go right to the bottom to see if anybody's saying, Peter, there's no sound. No, doesn't appear to be any stuff along those lines, so that's good. Surprise, isn't it? Good. This is from Jez James. Hi, Peter. Keith Botsford once said that Formula One drivers could be considered as replaceable light bulbs. For the fans, that may seem strange, but for the teams, that could be a reality? Question mark. Well, Keith Botsford, of course, was the very, very good writer who came from nowhere in motor racing terms. In other words, had no background in motor racing at all, knew nothing about it, and was given the position of Formula One correspondent for the Sunday Times, about the most important newspaper in the UK, around in the 70s, and immediately became, I wouldn't say self-appointed expert, but pretty much that. And a lot of people sort of went along with what he said. But I think most of it was his turn of phrase. He just wrote beautifully. And I've no criticism of him there. I'm not sure he knew very much about motorsport. But at that quote, actually, I can remember Bernie Ecclestone saying that to me face to face. Oh, it's just light bulbs, you know. The teams are the important thing, not the drivers. And that was his philosophy, that the teams will be there always and the drivers come and go and they're replaceable. And accidents actually aren't bad for business. I think he wouldn't want me quoting him as saying that, but that was the underlying theme of the whole comment. Of course, things completely different today, but except for one thing, of course, the power is with the teams. It's not with the drivers in Formula One, whereas in virtually every other sport, it is with the individuals. The team sports slightly different, but the team sports kind of depended on the presence of the individual to make the football team, achieve the success that it has. Whereas in motor racing, it's the team, and you can actually win a championship without having the best drivers. Not making any inferences here. And so that's what Bernie was saying. You know, you lose a driver, probably the ratings do go up, the headlines are bigger. It's a big accident, and then motor racing carries on and the team replaces the driver and he wins a race or two, and then suddenly everything's back to normal. And so I think that's what he's saying. And you know, it wasn't Keith Botsford that coined that at all. I remember Bernie saying that to my face, and I have to say I wasn't shocked. I was kind of, well, yeah, that's right, that's the business of Formula One, isn't it? Very sadly. And that's how we all kept going. When there was a horrendous accident, we didn't think, oh, they're all replaceable at all. I mean, I said, I never thought that. I thought every human being life was precious, and which is why, very precious, and why today I'm 100% pro safety in every dimension. I've gone to too many funerals in my lifetime. But the point I'm making is, how do you get out of bed the next morning and go motor racing again? Well, you go motor racing again by saying the sport continues, and the sport continues because the teams then replace that driver. And that's how it was. As hard as it is to imagine, that is how it was. And that's why Keith Botsford said that. And Keith was very close, actually, quite close to Bernie and Max, got to say. It's quite cold here. I don't know if that's going to interfere with the noise level of the mic. Somebody can abuse me on the chat if it does, but I've got to put the heater on. It's suddenly the temperature's just dropped in Spain the last 2 hours. Amazing. Anyway, thanks for that one. Very interesting opening question, actually. Next one is from Jez again. You've got three there, James. You've got need to be a little bit. I'll do two, I think, maybe. Well, let's see. Do you know why Brands is not used for Formula One? It was such a creative circuit compared with Silverstone. Do you think it will ever be used again? Well, it wasn't used because a lot of reasons. The main one was space, the circuit space and the way it's laid out a little bit, more so the paddock area, access to the paddock. Was a small tunnel under the track, no room to expand the paddock to Formula One dimensions. So it was just, Formula One outgrew Brands Hatch in that respect. And there was also a noise. There's always an ongoing noise thing at Brands Hatch as well, which would have been very annoying if you're trying to put the British Grand Prix on. So that was that. Lovely circuit. Yeah, much better than Silverstone. Great corners, undulations, very demanding in some areas. Today, it would be a great little test circuit, actually. Yes, and at the time when you had Silverstone and Brands, it was, oh, we're going to boring old Silverstone, flat as a pancake, windy ex-airfield circuit. Or you go to Brands Hatch, which is this beautiful, lovely, undulating piece of turf in Surrey. So Kent, actually. So yeah, no comparison really. Brands a much better circuit. Jez James again. Most exciting Formula One era: Mansell, Piquet, Prost, Senna, Rosberg. Reason: amazing sound speed, controlling the seemingly uncontrollable, with cars having such emotions and personality. Well, yeah, you could say in many ways it was a golden era of Formula One. That whole business of Nigel and Nelson infighting at Williams, and then Alan Prost and Senna. Keke Rosberg on there as well, in terms of his car control and how quick he was, and the lap he drove at Silverstone in '85 in the Williams Honda, and some of those amazing wins he pulled off, Detroit, Dallas, in the Williams Hondas as well. Not really, didn't enjoy himself, I don't think, so much at McLaren, but certainly at Williams he was very impressive. And it was, yeah, lots of speed. I mean, you haven't got haven't we got there? No, we got yeah, that's fair enough, those 5 drivers. And yeah, you've got 1,000 horsepower in qualifying. You've got cars with not a lot of chassis induced downforce, a lot of rules in that point, controlling that. And just, it was all about sheer power and brutality, and the circuits were still pretty dodgy as well. Great racing, golden era of Formula One. I would agree with you there. Final one from Jez. Could Williams have been even better than they were if Sir Frank didn't have the accident? Well, I think had Frank not had the accident, I think he might have persuaded. I've talked about the ultimatum Honda gave Frank at Monaco 1987, when they said, we'd like to continue to supply engines to you for 88 and 89, but we want a Japanese driver in the other car. And at that point, Nigel was the driver under contract for 87 and 88 with Williams, which meant that in Frank's mind, it was going to be Mansell Nakajima, Satoru Nakajima. And Frank, A, didn't want to be told who to put in one of his cars, and B, didn't think Mansell Nakajima was a strong enough championship driver lineup to take on the opposition. So he said no to Honda and went to Judd Engines. Now, had he not had the accident, maybe he might have thought differently. Maybe Honda might have had a bit more respect for Frank and not said, you must run Nakajima. And they would have found a home for him somewhere else, which of course they did at Lotus. And Frank might have been able to continue with PK Mansell in 88. And in that respect, of course, Williams would have been a lot more successful. That's only conjecture. But I remember a few people saying at the time, after Frank had his road accident, and bear in mind, we're talking about mid-80s now, 1986. Things are very different in Japan now. But in 86, I think the Japanese culture was not ready to understand and accept that somebody with Frank's injuries could continue to run the team as effectively as he had done prior to the accident. We'll never know that. That was a lot of the feedback I got from companies like Canon, for example, another Japanese company that we were with at the time. And maybe that did affect it a little bit. And as I say, that's the only way I can see things would have been any different. I think in terms of the 86 season, the 87 season, things panned out as they would have panned out had Frank not had the accident. It's only whether we would have kept Honda engines that's the issue. Sarosh Soman, hi Sarosh, another regular. Peter, driving the V10 Toyota, what was the attribute that caught your attention? Like if it was a passenger car driver, what's the most impactful feeling for that person? Acceleration, braking? I can't really say braking because I didn't get it was very cold and slightly wet. So I never got the brakes up to fully operating temperature. So I can't sit here and say, oh, wow, the brakes were the most amazing thing. Probably had I got them up to temperature, that's what I would be saying. That's what most people do say. So all I can talk about is acceleration, which was absolutely phenomenal. But if you keep your eyes focused well in advance and you're sort of allowing for, and you know what's going to happen, it all happened in a very logical way that you felt very much a part of the car when that was happening. There was nothing that was like frightening or anything like that. I think for me, it was the vibration actually over the bumps at high speed, going just before seeing how bumpy the car felt there with your foot flat on the throttle in top. And there was just a lot of vibration. That's all. I should have imagined that there would be, but I never did think that through. I was always like everybody else, thinking about the power and the brakes and everything. I never just thought about how much vibration there was. It was that really. And I wasn't going any like quickly enough in those conditions really to talk about G-force either. So I can't really talk about that. I'm sure if it had been dry and I'd had all day, I'd be able to say a bit more about it. But it was quite forgiving. That was the other thing. I mean, you could feel the back end when it snapped out. You could feel it was going to do that, and you just put on a little bit of correction. That was all okay. And slow speed corners, not high speed, but it was the vibration more than anything, really. Yeah, and also when you're going that quickly and you're not 100% comfortable in the car, because why would you be? It's not a seat specially made for you. And you've got the hands collar and the helmet and everything, there are inevitably going to be a bit of buffeting and the helmet's going to lift and things like that because it's not right. And there's always that, but that's not specific to the V10. That's just specific to driving any Grand Prix car, really. Sarosh says, Peter, there's a feeling that Ferrari isn't going to improve. Really? Could be wrong. If you were Leclerc, what's the logical thing to do now? What would be your advice? Well, my advice would be, you're not the only bloke in that situation this year, potentially. Max Verstappen may find himself in an uncompetitive or relatively uncompetitive Red Bull. And what Max is going to do is enjoy his year, drive every race as well as he possibly can, 100% maximum, but he's going to do a few other things. He's going to do his Nürburgring stuff and he's going to enjoy life. He's not going to let it get to him. And I would advise Charles to do the same thing. Do the Tour of Britain for a start in a Lancia Stratos and do a few other things that he's always wanted to do. If the Formula One car isn't going to allow you to win Grand Prix and therefore World Championships, this is a good year, A, to drive a bad car well, which is not easy, and get the best from it, and B, get out there and enhance your driving in some other areas. Maybe do a couple of endurance races, whatever, fit it in. That's what I would do. Anything, whether it's karting, whether it's rallying, whatever you wanted to do, go and do it. Do some Formula 2. If they let you do it, they wouldn't, of course. Formula E, whatever, blow people's mind. And just keep yourself sharp and keep winning if you can. It's very important to keep winning. If you're not in a winning Grand Prix car and you haven't won for a while, even if you win a minor historic rally event, you'd still feel good about it. Winning is winning. And I mean, that goes right back. I'll never forget when I guess it was Carlos Pache had his very sad aircraft accident. That was it Pache? No, I don't actually. I think it was after Tom's accident, Tom Price's accident. Sorry, I'm slightly vague there, but anyway, I remember chatting to Alan Rees about who are they going to get into the shadow, and he said, "Well, 2 weeks later, I was reading Motoring News, and on the front page was a picture of Alan Jones winning a Formula 5000 race at Calder, I think, or may have been Oran Park, somewhere pretty obscure in terms of international or British motor racing. There was Alan Jones winning a 5000 race somewhere. And he thought, oh, that bloke can handle power. We'll put him in the car. Well, that was how Alan Jones got selected. It just shows, you win a race, you get a headline or two. It's not a bad thing. Just keep winning, keep winning, keep winning. And going back to Charles, he hasn't won anything for quite a long time, has he? Kind of nice for him to feel what it feels like to hold a trophy again. Sarosh says, Peter, Sebastian Vettel was struggling with the loss of rear downforce from 2014, but he drives quite well in the rain. So if he's got a good feel to drive in the wet, why couldn't he adapt to downforce degradation? Well, because everything happens much more slowly in the rain, and you don't want that instant power that you need if you're doing his V corners in the dry, which you need at rotation point from his point of view. The last thing you need is a back end that's not going to allow him to do an instant rotation at the peak of the V. But in the wet, everything's happening much more slowly. So he doesn't need that instant response. He can easily manipulate it and go away from the corner with no problem at all. And he's got, there's no doubt. and I don't want anyone who might have been watching this channel for a period of time to be in any illusion about this. I think Sebastian Vettel has enormous touch and feel and reflexes and balance and all the things the great Grand Prix drivers have. What he doesn't have is a Max Verstappen feel for how to put all that together and create short corners. His way of doing it was to do these sort of V corner things, a bit like Jacques Lafitte and Jean Alesi. And that's fine, but you do need a good back end for that rotation point, whereas Max can live with it because he's creating a shorter corner and it's all curves rather than straight lines and then a V. So yeah, the wet, there's no doubt Vettel was always going to be good in the wet. He's got that car control, he's got that feel. Hey Peter, I watched 2007 season, and one thing that was interesting to me was how many mistakes Alonso was making in comparison to Hamilton, like bad starts and locking up. Why do you think that was? Well, locking up, Fernando would say, if it was prior to about the British Grand Prix, he would say it's because of those rubbishy carbon industry brakes. And when they got Hitcos on my car, look at Monza, I never locked up. That's basically what he would say. Bad starts, yeah, don't know what to say about that. No, don't know what to say about that. Lewis was always good, wasn't he? Off the line in 07, or most times he's been pretty good starter. Fernando, you have to say he's a pretty good starter as well. So I have no explanation for why he wouldn't have been very good off the line or made more mistakes off the line than Lewis. Maybe, I don't know. Did you look at whether or not he was on the dirty or clean side of the grid? That'd be the other factor, of course, that would come into that. But no reason to think, in my mind, that Fernando made bad starts at McLaren. I don't think he had a problem with the clutch in terms of what the problem he had with the brake feel. No, I can't explain that one. Zavej Dougal, do you think there should be another small series like the Tasman Cup in the winter to keep the drivers and fans entertained? I certainly think many drivers would be in it. Well, we have that in New Zealand and had it at its peak. Probably not now, but Toyota did a really good job of sort of promoting a New Zealand winter series, which was a great championship. You know, speak to guys like Liam Lawson about it, or Nick Cassidy and those guys. Josh Hill did it, Damon's son, and a lot of good people have come out of that series. I don't know. I was walking Dexter the other day thinking, it was like January the 3rd. And I thought, wow, amazing to think back in 68, already the first round of the World Championship was already over because it was held on January the 1st. And the minute I had that thought, I thought to myself, we've got enough races already. Do we really want to restart that early? And I guess there's a point where you have to say part of the Bernie Ecclestone philosophy of less is more does apply, and maybe it's over the winter in terms of racing action. And then because we got so many races once the season does start in such quick succession, that the whole less is more thing is completely thrown out of the window, and more is less comes into play almost. So I think we just keep it as it is. As I've said, in my opinion, the top 3 drivers in the World Championship or others in top 6 maybe should, as part of the Concord Agreement, they should have to spend a certain amount of time on the road doing charity functions in key regions for Formula One, China, India, South Africa, doing a world tour, putting on maybe a karting event, all for charity, and doing all the big chat shows on TV and promoting Formula One over the winter. So that countries like South Africa, for example, or some of the other South American countries or India can get the budget together to have a Grand Prix, all for the benefit of the sport. So I think that's what I'd like to see happen. It's not happening, and it's not in the Concord Agreement, the new one, as far as I know. Well, it's definitely not. So, I'm not saying that because I want to make life difficult for the top drivers. I'm saying it because they have a relatively short lifespan in terms of their earning career. This is when they're stars, they're earning a lot of money. Let them earn their money and let them go out and promote Formula One in all these regions with nice events for charity, mixing with royalty, mixing with the governments of the countries, and promoting Formula One and expanding the business. The drivers are the people that the fans want to see, not the people behind the scenes. They want the drivers. So that's what should be happening, and that's how we could keep the winters alive. If there was a huge charity event in Germany or France, 2 countries which don't have Grand Prix at the moment, and involved 7 or 8 of the Formula One drivers all competing, and there was going to be a big gala dinner and whatever you're going to have, that would be a big event, and you could get a lot of TV coverage for that and a lot of good publicity, I think, for Formula One. But it doesn't happen. Another one from Zavez. If the 60s Formula One drivers were given modern Formula cars and the modern drivers a 60s car, who do you think will be able to complete a race earlier? At first I thought the modern drivers, but then I remembered how just one misinput can be the difference between life and death in the 60s. Since you know a lot about both of them, I'd like to know your answer. So what are they doing? They're putting the 60s Formula One drivers in modern cars and modern drivers in the 60s cars. Oh, I think the 60 drivers in the modern cars would do a much better job. If the modern drivers follow the lead set by the great Lance Stroll, who I think said something along the lines of, I would never drive a car without seatbelts or rollover bar and all this stuff. What would he do if he climbed into a Lotus 25 with no seatbelts and no rollover bar to speak of, and did a lap of Spa on the old circuit in the wet? Not great. But I think if you took Dan Gurney and put him into a current Red Bull, or you put Jim Clark into a current McLaren, I think within about 3 laps they'd be right on the pace, wouldn't they? Probably quicker, actually. In Jimmy's case, I can't imagine it would take anybody with the right talent to win the Sterling Moss, Jim Clark talent level, providing they did a few days in the sim, just learned how to use the clutch and the paddle shift and how to operate a few of the basic things on the steering wheel. Those guys, assuming you could transplant all the timing and everything, and the age was absolutely right. Jimmy was 30 years old and he was at his peak as a driver. Of course he'd go in there and he'd blow Lando away, no question. Whether Lando would ever get into a Lotus, I mean, Lando, he's not afraid, I think, to throw a car around, but I can't imagine any modern driver. They've driven throughout their lives with seatbelts, carbon chassis, left foot braking, survival cells. They would be completely lost if you put them in anything. If you put them in a space frame Brabham, 64 Brabham, and told them to do a lap of Rouen down the hill through the sweepers, yeah, they'd say, yeah, right, come on, I'm going to become an artist or something. Super chat here. Peter, love the channel. Thanks. Please don't answer if this is too personal. I recently read you were a passenger in Frank's road car. Wow, is that true? What was that time of your life like? Turning off the heater now. It's got a bit too hot. It's been going on throughout the stream, I think. It is true. Yeah. It was... we were at a test at Ricard with the new cars for 86, the new FW11s. Nigel and Nelson were there. Those were the days of testing. And I was at the cutting edge of sponsorship management, and I had 15, 20 guests from Mobil, one of our sponsors, at the test. And it was even better than being at a race because I had lots of time with the drivers. I could take them into the garage when there was no engines running. Everything was just wonderful. And that's one of the things actually Formula One has lost, I think, by not having tests, is the ability to look after its sponsors that way. And we did all that. Anyway, it was Saturday morning and the test was due to finish that night. We'd been there since Thursday, I think. And Frank said, oh, Peter, I'm going back lunchtime, got a half marathon to run tomorrow, Sunday in the UK. Do you want to lift to the airport? Yeah, of course. So he and I set off about lunchtime for an evening flight, for like a 5 or 6 o'clock flight out of Nice. And we were in Frank's rental car, an Avis Ford Sierra, one of the very first Ford Sierras with a very angled windscreen pillar and not a angle at the top. It was all curved, all aerodynamically shaped, but very little strength in that windscreen pillar. Not that anybody thought about it at the time. It was quite a radical shape for a road car, that Ford Sierra. And of course, Frank, being Frank, wasn't like Colin Chapman, who always specified a Mercedes road car for safety and comfort reasons. Frank always wanted the cheapest deal with a reasonable car. So it was a Ford Sierra for him. Anyway, he set off, and through the sort of mountain section down into the open plains north of Ricard, he was throwing the car around quite a lot. I was just next to him and driving well. You know, I knew he'd won that Capri race at Brands, and I knew he'd had a reasonable Formula 3 career, and I'd never actually driven quickly with him on the road though. And I remember one point he braked very late into a hairpin, downhill hairpin. And rather than speak to my boss and say, Frank, not so fast, I just said, oh, the brake's okay on this thing, Frank. It was my way of saying, you know, you're braking a bit late. And he said, oh yeah, they're fine, brakes are good. And it was quite, you know, just edgy really. And we came out of that sort of hill section, and then we came into a downhill, fast, open French country road with gravel on both sides. Just enough room for it to be you know, an oncoming car as well, but you'd probably have to slow down for it. It wasn't a lot of room. And he went through this kink, and the back end came out. And at that point, we were going reasonably quickly, 65, 70 miles an hour, I guess. And I think Frank, I remember thinking, as you often do when you're with a great Grand Prix, oh, now we'll see how good Frank is, because we're not going slowly now, and you've got to be pretty accurate with the correction, throttle and steering. And Frank basically overcorrected a bit, and the car snapped back the other way, and we got into one of these, and we headed off on the inside. And the last thing I saw looked like we were just heading for an old stone wall on the inside there, and it was kind of jagged edge to it. And I remember I just curled myself up in a ball in the passenger seat, and then, you know, shut my eyes, and there was an enormous impact, and then there was nothing, and that was, of course, the car flying through the air, and then it landed nose first, came down on its roof and somersaulted 2 or 3 times. And when it all came to, there was a smell of fuel. We were upside down, the roof had caved in, very little room to maneuver, seat belts, briefcases burst open, you know, seat belts all tangled everywhere. It was a complete mess. And all Frank was saying was, I'm trapped, I can't get out, get me out, get me out. And of course, all I thought of was, there is fuel and we need to get him out. And if he's caught in the seat belts, I can easily release that. So I released that, and didn't seem to make any difference. I was more or less okay, I felt. And so I just tried to drag him out under his armpits, trying to keep him stable, and bring him out between the 2 seats through the back window, which was semi-smashed. And I saw these 2 big boots appear as I was trying to break the glass of the rear window. And this guy kicked a lot of the remaining glass out of the rear window and helped me get Frank out the back there. And at this point, Frank was saying, I can't feel my legs, I can't feel my legs, they're hurting. And I sat there in the field with him for about 50 minutes in the end, just cradling him and talking to him. And I spoke to that guy, and he drove up to Ricard, actually. I said in my French, you know, go up to the Ricard circuit. We have Formula One, Frank Williams, Nigel Mansell, Nelson Piquet, because Nelson had a Mercedes road car with a car phone in it, and that's what I knew we had to get before anything else. Obviously, he had to try and ring for an ambulance as well. But that guy turned out to be the mathematics teacher of Cora Reutemann, Carlos's daughter. Can you believe it? Great guy. I never actually met him. I never saw him again. Amazing. And eventually, as I say, after about 50 minutes, Nelson arrived with Nigel in the Merc, and then we got the phone, and then we rang Bernie, and we rang Jackie Oliver and a few others to get people flown over, and the ambulance came up from Toulon and went from there. So yeah, I mean, and it was very touch and go when we got Frank eventually back to the UK. He was, we took him out of France much earlier than the French thought we should have, purely because he wasn't getting great treatment in a big public hospital in Marseille. Couldn't breathe really. And so we got him back to England, and James Weaver's father, James, very fast racing driver, his father did the operation for a tracheotomy, got that into Frank, got the fluid out of his lungs, and basically saved his life at that point. But then he had another relapse, and it was about a week after in the London hospital, and that was a very dangerous period as well. And there was talk of turning off the life support machine, but luckily that decision was not taken for obvious reasons, and so it developed from there. I spent, in terms of my life, I then spent, I guess, probably, I mean, right up until about July, I was by his bed and or with him at least 3 days a week. Ginny, his wife, obviously was with him all the time, as much as she could. But whenever she wanted a break, I would go in and sit next to Frank by his bed. in the London hospital, and then subsequently we do other stuff as well. So yeah, it was a huge, huge thing in my life, and obviously a reminder of how fragile everything is. In the space of a millisecond, things can change like that. And I was okay and Frank wasn't, and yet I was sitting next to him. I think that's because A, it came down more on his side and he took a direct blow on his head, and B, I was able to roll myself up into a ball in the football area, whereas Frank was still behind the wheel, fighting the wheel. I think that was two of the reasons why I was okay. But yeah, massive, massive time for me. Anyway, thanks for that one. Yeah, very sad memories to think about. I was talking to Johnny Williams only yesterday, actually. He was on his way on holiday driving somewhere, and we were chatting about some very funny old times at Williams and those days, really. You know, it was just a golden period in many ways. It was sad in other ways. We lost people. We lost, Frank's had his accident. We had other things. But what a time in which we lived. Hi, Peter. Do you have any memories of the Rothmans 50,000 race at Brands in 72? I was there on the day. The format, although exciting, did not deliver. No way such a race would happen today. No, they put Formula 5000 and Formula 1 together. I've got the race program here, actually. Emerson first, Brian second, Henri Pescarolo third, Jerry Bill finished fourth, James Hunt fifth in a Formula 2 March, John Watson sixth in his Formula 2 Chevron. Alan Rollinson, another very quick driver, was the first Formula 5000 driver home in a Lola. It would have been a T142, I guess. Then Tom Belso, quick Dane. David Prophet, Claude Bourgogne, who was very good in Formula 4. Didn't produce a lot more after that. Had a lot of battles with Dave Walker. Steve Thompson, 11th. Steve Thompson, very quick in the wet. One of the quickest wet weather drivers of all time. But, yeah, it wasn't so good in the dry. But, yeah, wow, Emerson won it. Wouldn't happen today, would it? No. Things have changed so much. Well, we wouldn't even have Brands Hatch today, let alone any of that other stuff. Okay, there we go. Aaron, hi Peter. I think you've said that Toyota wasn't treated well the last time they were in Formula 1. Why was this? Is it now a clean slate if and when Toyota re-enters Formula 1 as their own team, do you think? I think it's a bit like Michelin. It's like, well, they didn't treat us very well last time. Why should we go back into it? And the way they're doing it, I think, is pretty circumspect, but appropriate. And they're doing it nicely with Haas and not doing too much and just being there and getting all the benefits without having to go through all the agonies. But what I meant was there was a lot of sort of giggling behind the hands at Ron Dennis, Bernie level of Toyota and how they're not doing it the British way, basing the team in the UK, following the British model of how to do it. They did it their way, based around a very successful rally setup they had in Cologne, Germany. They built their own engines. They did their own wind tunnels. They didn't take advice, if you like. And I think it was more that a lot of the key British people thought, if only they'd given all that money to me, I could have done a much better job for them, rather than let them go and do their own thing. There was no respect for Toyota on the basis of, wow, the world's biggest car companies in Formula 1. They're not doing Formula 1 the way we would do it, but let's give them credit for being different. Let's give them credit for being there in the first place. Let's celebrate their presence. I mean, I can remember standing with Ron Dennis at the French Grand Prix, and Ron was nitpicking the design of the Toyota motorhome and tarpaulin and the color scheme, and everything was just ratty. And I just thought, you know, why can't these people just accept Toyota for being the company they are and enjoy them instead of criticizing them all the time? And there was, amongst the journalists, it was a similar thing, you know, they don't know this, they don't know that, they haven't got this guy's no good. It was always negative. And I'm not exaggerating. A lot of people today would probably not remember that, but that's exactly as it was. You know, I'm just telling you the truth. And as I say, you know, you're asking about their approach with Haas. I do. I mean, on the basis of all that, I think they're doing an excellent job with Haas. And as I say, I want to see Ollie Berman in a Celica GT, please. Maybe partnered with Jari-Matti Latvala in the Tour of Britain 2026. That would be good, wouldn't it? They'd win it for sure. Drew C. Christian Horner thinks short term. If that guy really wanted to share in a Formula 1 team, why didn't he buy Williams from Claire when COVID hurt Claire's pocket instead of wrestling a Thai and Austrian for a piece? For a piece, yeah. You mean the Red Bull, Thai, and Austrian connections, and sort of trying to get that. Well, Christian is Christian. He's got his own career path and has had his own career path, racing driver, and then put together a very good Formula 3000, Formula GP3 team, Arden, and was then approached by Red Bull to come and run what was then Jaguar, and did a very good job in that he persuaded Adrian to join and allowed Adrian to get on with it, choose his own people, guys like Rob Marshall, Pete Prod, and let Adrian, and then he basically allowed Adrian to stay at Red Bull long enough to win a whole bunch of championships, and was a good buffer between Adrian and Red Bull and everything else that engineers need. That's where Christian was very good. So now he might think, well, I've done all that. Maybe I need to do my own team now. I give him. I don't say why didn't he do it why didn't he buy Williams or something. I think his career's gone about as you would expect it to go. He's done a very good job with it, and now I would imagine if I was Christian, he should be looking to be the next FIA president or something like that, shouldn't he? Running, replacing Stefano one day, maybe at Liberty. That's the sort of thing he should do. Why would he want to go and run a Formula One team or do his own team? Doesn't make any sense. And as I say, in terms of doing the job, what he did with Adrian was what created the success at Red Bull. It wasn't necessarily all the other things. I mean, he's no different from a lot of other people out there who can run a team. Jonathan Wheatley, good example. It's just that at the time he did a much better job than Ron and Frank of keeping Adrian happy and allowing Adrian to do what he wanted to do. That's where the key was. So now if he doesn't have Adrian with him, I don't think he'll do anything special anywhere, and he might as well just enjoy his life and become president of the FIA and live in Paris or something, if that's what he wanted to do. That would be my take on Christian, but maybe he's got other things. This Raparera. Hi Peter, what learnings do you think there are for new Formula One entrants from the Formula One USF1 entry attempt? Well, so different now. It would never have happened. I mean, the reason we did USF1 was because as now, where there's still an available grid slot, there's only 20, there's 22 cars now instead of 20, but you could at least have 24 if you really wanted to, I guess. And at the time, there was lots of space on the grid. There were lots of reasons to think that you could do a US Formula One team with technology based in the United States, run it out of Europe, operate it out of Europe, which is what we did. It was much cheaper, much more logical to do that. And to do an American team with American drivers, I think was a great idea. And it was all knocked on the head, basically, by Bernie and Max looking at our business plan and saying, wow, that's really good. Those guys shouldn't be allowed to just do that. We'll get a whole lot of other people to do the same thing. And they looked at our potential budget, and said, right, that's what we'll create a new championship around this budget that Peter Windsor and Ken Anderson have come up with. That was called the new budget cap Formula One, which we didn't want at all. We just wanted to sneak onto the back of the grid, start walking, then trotting, then running, then galloping, as you do with a new Formula One team. But they wanted to create this whole new championship. And one of the reasons they wanted to do that was because they were renegotiating the Concord Agreement with all the existing teams, and they wanted some sort of threat to be able to say to the existing teams, if you don't sign, we're going to go behind this new budget cap Formula One, which of course was never going to happen, but we were guinea pigs for that. And so that's where it all collapsed. But that would never happen today because there's much more control of the teams. The teams are much more together. Liberty, the FIA is much better organized in that sense. It's not just two rebel guys wanting to run things the way they want to run it, i.e. Bernie and Max, and ruining it with this ridiculous thing called the budget cap formula. We wanted to run exactly the same formula as normal teams. Bernie said, oh no, you're going to have more revs, you're going to have bigger wings, you're going to have this and that, and you'll blow Ferrari away. I mean, it's just complete nonsense. It was never going to happen. And that's what ruined USF1 ultimately, all that faffing around for a year. And then of course we had to build a factory and a car, get it all crash tested, and do everything in the space of 3 months, which was never going to happen. But so that wouldn't happen today. And indeed it didn't happen with Haas, because they gave Haas at least 24 months to get the team going. We had 3 months. So the whole thing was a mess. But again, it wouldn't happen today because of the way the sport is run. It's run in a much more logical fashion. Essie Madragon. Hi Peter. Hola Peter and chat. Is it just me, or is Formula One around the corner? Time is flying. Well, it's good to have somebody who's positive. Obviously, looking forward to the new season. That's really good to see. And it is flying. Yep. It's now the third week of January almost, or second week really, but we're going into the third week. And the Monte Carlo rally is about to happen, and then the testing will start before you can blink. And we're already getting team launches. I noticed that we've got a team, not even a car livery. We had a Racing Bulls team apparel launch. Actually, they said we've dropped our new teamwear for 2026. And I thought, wow, this is a great thing. They're actually listening to another Peter Windsor thing, which is that a Formula One team should have the brains and the guts to do a Formula One team that's completely against the norm and have sort of straw in the garage floor and a guy in the back singing "Don't Worry, Be Happy" with a guitar, and everybody's wearing their normal street clothes and everything's laid back, and then you go out and blow everybody away. Of course, that's the key to it. But yeah, not following the Formula One norm, and drink bottles are banned, and you're not allowed to have earbuds in your ear or a headset on if you're a driver, and all that stuff that would be really good to do. And I thought, wow, this is great. Racing Bulls are going to drop team uniforms in 26. They're just going to turn up in their t-shirts and jeans. But of course, what I hadn't anticipated was this is the new misuse of the word drop, where drop means announce. Drop for me is, Marnus Labuschagne has been dropped from the Australian cricket team due to a poor run of form, but no doubt will be back next summer after his brilliant performances in the Sheffield Shield. That's been dropped. When you drop team apparel, it means you no longer got team apparel, but not in this case. It means it's dropped from the sky. Isn't it great? And those two male models they've got now at Racing Bulls, I mean, do they really need to drive racing cars and get dirty and sweaty and all that? Just leave them there and just be a race team in the garage in the pit lane. You don't need to go out and race the cars around the circuit, something boring like that. Liam and Arvid, they just need to stand there, don't they, and pose around. That's how they are in all the pictures, I think. Yeah, and if you look at the pictures, actually, they're beautifully done. Unbelievable pictures. Better than male models. It's just like this is the front page of Vogue every week. Yeah. Zaviz says audio's fine, Peter. Well, that's very good. Thank you very much. Audio's good. Another one. Thank you. David Del Gamma. Hi, Peter from Michigan. Hope you're well. I missed my Formula One. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, Michigan. Have I been to Michigan? I have indeed been to Michigan. I've been to the Michigan Speedway, where I told my great story about Arie Luyendyk being told to pass the cars in front of him, and he does, in response to Ganassi's, not Chip Ganassi, yeah, Chip Ganassi's message. Pass him, Arie, and he did. S. Mandragon, perfect time slot for Oz, Peter. Good, that's good to hear. And congratulations again to the Australian cricket team for their brilliant victory in the Ashes series. I thought Alan Gow, my Australian mate, came up with the best quote on that, which was that he was very annoyed because he had a lot of money on Australia securing the Ashes in 10 days and it took them 11 days and he lost all his money. For those that don't know about cricket, it should actually have taken the total number of days in which they play is 25 days. And Australia secured the trophy in 11 days. Less than half. Mega. Connor Clark. Hi, Peter. What do you think of Fiona McLaughlin racing in the new FR New Zealand series? Yeah, very good. Fiona McLaughlin. Yeah, I think that whole series, as I say, is a very good series, and it's nice that it's happening. I just wish it had more exposure, A, and B, I wish, and with all these feeder formula things, it's there are so many of them. For a start, there are too many of them. Secondly, you've got to be able to base the performance of any young driver against some sort of yardstick, and too often virtually every year, it's a completely new class of drivers, and it's very difficult, therefore, to compare. And at the risk of sounding, in the old days, but if you take Formula Ford 1600 as a good example, you always had the Sid Foxes or the Colin van der Vels around which you could, so many of them actually, around which you could gauge your talent and your pace. And I think that's one of the reasons we see so many young drivers make it apparently relatively easily up into Formula 3, maybe even to Formula 2, and then they kind of disappear without trace. It's because the level of competition really is much, much higher than they've ever experienced, because there are so many different feeder formulae. And there weren't. Back in the days, there were nothing like the same number. There was the British Formula Ford Championship, there were one or two of them. There was a European Formula Ford Championship. And then basically it was Formula 3. And you knew against whom you were competing, and you knew the yardstick. But here, you're competing against a lot of people you've never heard of. Maybe you've raced against them in karting or something. It doesn't mean much. That's my only reservation about it. But yeah, I love that whole New Zealand winter series. And good luck. Can Alonso win a race in 26? I think his last season in Formula 1, Leclerc is coming to Aston as new lead driver. Is he? Okay, good. I'm glad you've announced that. That'd be good for Charles to be with Adrian Newey. I'm sure Adrian will be happy about that. I do think Alonso can not only win a race, I think he can win a championship. Well, by definition, if you can win a race in 26, you will win a championship, because you'll have a race-winning car. And it won't just be by luck or default or because of the fault of others that Fernando's won a race. He'll win a race because the car's good and he's still very quick. So for one thing, if he does win the championship in 26, why do you think he would retire? First point. And secondly, why do you think he'd just win a race? Adrian Newey, Honda engines, Fernando Alonso, massive money and support from Stroll. Talk about, you know, if he doesn't win a race, I'd be absolutely shocked. And I think he will be. That's my take on Aston Martin. I would say if anybody wants an outside bet on the World Championship, put your money on Fernando Alonso. Martin Lee, 6694. And know sometimes you get a bit sad with the comment, but look here, you get the best comment. Thanks for all the good vibes video. Oh, thank you very much. And a heart there. Thank you. Very kind. Yeah, I was very sad thinking about the Frank accident, actually. Obviously, it was a huge thing, but I was just thinking of some of the moments by his bed and Ginny being there as well, and some of the laughs we had, and how brave Frank was in understanding the injuries that he had. And I remember him saying, typical Frank, when we were in the field in France waiting for the ambulance to come, I remember him saying, I'm never going to drive quickly again. From now on, I'm going to get a goggomobile, and I'm going to drive around in a goggomobile. And I remember thinking of all the vehicles you could select as being slow and unlikely to cause trouble. The goggomobile is still about the least that you would think of. And for those that don't know what a goggomobile is, I think I'm right in saying that it was a post-war bubble car thing, but actually I think it was German, and I think it used a lot of parts from Stuka's, sort of unused cockpit sections and things like that, and a tiny little sort of motorcycle two-stroke engine thing. Goggomobile. But having said that, Jim Clark drove a goggomobile in an auto test once during the 1957 Suez Crisis in Scotland. He did an auto test. There's a picture of him going between the cones in a goggomobile, owned I think by Ian Scott Watson. And Jimmy's wearing a shirt with a tie as well, no helmet, doing a very good job between the cones. Rup Shaney. Hi Peter. Can Formula One ever had time? Can Formula One ever had a time? Has Formula One ever had a time where everyone had the same car? It would be exciting if that ever happens again. Well, the nearest Formula One ever gets to that is when there's a whole bunch of really good teams and drivers, all basically with the same engine. But I don't think that's ever happened when they've all been on the same tyres. I was going to say in tyres, but that's never happened, because in the climax era, well, that's not strictly true. I think in the climax era, everybody was on Dunlops, weren't they? Yeah, so maybe it was the 60s with climax engines, Brabham, Lotus, Cooper, and then you had the Ferraris as well, pretty much on a par, BRMs. I'd say then that was, the cars were very closely matched in the 60s. The next era, the Cosworth era, you got into the tyre war, Dunlop, Goodyear, Firestone, which was a differentiator. But the Cosworth engines did bring a lot of teams more closely together. And then finally the V8, V10 era. Again, You had Michelin, Bridgestone, Tyre War, but a lot of teams did well with engines that you could buy off the shelf, really, effectively a package deal for the year, V8s, V10s, reliable, and we had close racing then. But ever since the hybrid era, it's been more difficult. The engine's much more expensive, much more complicated to run, and that has affected the midfield team's ability to do as good a job on the aero and the rest of it, I think, in my opinion, because the power unit takes so much of the package, the Formula One package these days. And so, yeah, if I had to pick one era, I'd say it was the 60s. And that's where we had 61 Ferrari. The V6 Ferrari was better than everything. But then by 62, the Climax V8 had come into play. And then they had fuel injection as well. And that brought it up to parity with the Ferrari in effect. So, and the BRM as well, simultaneously. So 62 onwards, you had Ferrari, BRM and Climax engines, all very competitive right up to the end of 65. Yeah, Zavish Douglas says, so sad Renault's basically out of the sport. To think 2 decades earlier they were winning championships. Well, not only that, they've been winning races. They won the first ever Grand Prix. Don't forget that as well, in the early 1900s. And they've done so well over the years with their engine, pretty well with their team. Never won a championship with their team, but the Renault team as such, but they ran, obviously with Fernando Alonso, it was slightly different, the Mild 7 thing. I suppose you could argue that I'm talking about more the yellow Renault turbos. And then, yeah, all that history, all that heritage, and it's all gone. And yet they've allowed Audi to come in on the basis that everybody has to go without MGUH, which I think is very wrong. And you may say, well, is the MGH relevant to road cars anyway? Answer, yes. What engines are Porsche now using in all their SUVs? Engines with MGUH in them. So Formula One has got rid of MGUH to keep Audi happy, and simultaneously we've lost Renault. I don't think it's a good thing. Connor Clark. Hi Peter, I've been watching the 81 season, had a question about what the reaction at the time and your feelings about Alan Jones not going to the podium in Brazil 81 after Carlos beat him. Yeah, pretty understandable. I wouldn't have thought he was going to go to the podium either. Carlos beat him. That's not how Alan Jones would have seen it. Alan Jones would have seen it that he had a contract with Frank that if he was in P2 within, I think it was 6 seconds, maybe 5 seconds of Carlos, that they would always let Alan win and Carlos would be told to finish second. And they didn't do it. Well, they gave that order to Carlos, but he ignored it. And so therefore Alan had to finish second behind Carlos, and he was so annoyed he didn't go to the podium. So completely understandable from Alan's point of view. From Carlos's point of view, he had quite an interesting argument, which was, I mean, obviously he felt that he was quicker than Alan in the wet and that was going to be his day, and he won that race. And he was delighted to have won it. But when they said, but why didn't you let Jones pass as per your contract? He said, well, because they never gave me the gap over Alan and gave me a chance to get further than 5 seconds away from him. I was just driving around at the slowest possible speed. But if they told me that the thing was going to come into play, I would have pulled out a 10, 20 second, 30 second lead. No problem at all. That was his response. So as ever, you know, the whole grey area in the contract and the way it was drawn up and the whole ludicrous thing came into play. But that contract was brought up, it was signed at the beginning of 80. And I think Carlos also felt, I paid my dues in 80 and now 81, you know, all bets are off, I'm going to go motor racing. And there was also a third thing where he said to me after Brazil 81, he said something like, well, you know, Alan didn't exactly make it easy for me at Long Beach, did he? No, I think he said, Alan never thanked me after Long Beach. That's right. That's what he said. And, you know, read into that what you will. Alan won Long Beach and Carlos felt that he had helped Alan there and hadn't raced him when he could have and didn't get any thanks for it. But, you know, I understand Alan's point of view, but being very close to Carlos, obviously I was delighted with the result of Brazil 81. But Carlos was thinking mainly about Nelson Piquet. He couldn't believe that Nelson had started on slicks. He said, if anybody in the planet Earth should know that in Brazil, in Jacarepaguá, in Rio, that once it rains all afternoon. It should have been Nelson Piquet. And there he was on slicks. Carlos thought that was absolutely hilarious. Formula 1 2378 SM. Charles Leclerc is the one and only driver who could fight Max and have a chance of winning. George, arguably, but Lando and Carlos, Albon, Oscar are mid-level drivers. Yeah, I don't know whether you're replying to somebody else there or telling me that. Let me think. Do I agree with all that? I think Lewis is still potentially somewhere in that, group, I would say. Lando, Carlos, Albon, Oscar are mid-level drivers. Well, they're very, very good Grand Prix drivers. They're not great Grand Prix drivers. That's the difference. I wouldn't say they're mid-level. They're all capable of winning Grand Prix, for sure. Charles is the one and only driver who could fight Max. No, I think George can fight Max. And I don't think it's an argument. I think George will fight Max. And I think he's got a very good chance of winning the championship this year. Obviously, the big proviso in italics, if the Mercedes, the factory Mercedes, is a quick car with a quick power unit, which I'm sure it will be. So George definitely will be up there. I think Kimi will probably win a race. Kimi Antonelli, that is. George potentially the championship. Fernando potentially the championship. And McLaren will therefore have a more difficult chance of winning a championship, but for sure they'll win races, with probably Oscar having a slight advantage over Lando this year, I think. Only because Lando's won his championship. And you could argue it's going to make him relaxed and he'll drive even better. Equally, it may take the edge off him slightly. You never know. But here's a question. This is a question for everybody, and I might do a poll around this, but I'll float it now. And this is under the heading of, if the Aston Martin Honda is a very good car and it's capable of winning Grand Prix in the hands of Fernando Alonso, and if therefore by some stroke of luck, Lance Stroll wins a Grand Prix in 26, who, dare I say prior to that, who do you think, in your opinion, is the least talented driver ever to have won a Grand Prix since 1950? It's a bit of a distasteful question to ask, isn't it? I feel sorry for whomever is selected there, but I might do a poll. But it's difficult to do a poll because you've got to come up with a list of people, and the polls are all designed around yes or no, whatever. So it won't be a poll, but let's just get it from you guys. Maybe, we can go over the next 3 or 4 live streams. You can come up with drivers that you think are the least talented drivers ever to have won a Grand Prix, the least deserving winners of a Grand Prix, or more than one Grand Prix, you might say. I can certainly come up with a list of a few drivers that are the most talented drivers never to have won a Grand Prix. Chris Amon right at the top of the list, of course. But the other way around is quite interesting, isn't it? Yeah. So let's see what you come up with there. This is under the heading of that. Lance, be ready. Lance Stroll could win a race in 26. Lewis and Alonso are so old for racing now, says Formula 12378. I disagree completely. They've got all the benefit of all the fitness regimes that'll keep them young and healthy and fit that Jack Brabham and Damon Hill and Fangio never had, and yet they were quite able to race, into their 40s. I think I'm not doing Damon a disservice there. I don't think he wasn't young anyway. I mean, apologies, Damon, if you were under 40, I can't remember. But certainly in the case of Jack Brabham, he was 44, racing wheel-to-wheel with Jochen Rindt in 1970, as looking as quick as ever he'd looked throughout his career, age 44, at a time, as I say, when they had nothing like the same resources around them to help them stay fit and young that Fernando and Lewis have these days. So I don't agree with that at all. Edgar de Melendez. Thank you again, Peter. Many blessings. Thank you very much. It's very kind. Speed Monkey. Will you be following Rovan Pera in Super Formula? I will indeed. And he's in good hands because I know Richard Selwyn, very, very good race engineer, used to be with iSport, then Lotus, and I know he's doing some work now with High Tech, has been seconded to go out to Japan and help that program along with Cali. And I really fascinated to see how he gets on. I think, with Cali, it's a little bit like Kimi, isn't it? You've just got to, I just hope he's applies himself at the sort of level of sharpness and self-discipline that you have to at that level, especially Super Formula in Japan, which is so competitive. And And we'll see. We'll see whether he has or not. I mean, for him to make the decision to walk away from rallying to do this is a huge decision, which in itself suggests there's a massive amount of commitment and passion there. But the proof will be when they start running. So I'm definitely going to be following it, and I'll definitely keep everybody updated on what he does. And indeed what's going on in that championship in general, because it looks like a really good series. Really, well, it is a great series. Never been anything but, going right back to the Ross Cheever days. The first guy really to show the world how to do an outside pass into turn 1 at Suzuka, off the line and during a race. Just brilliant. Racer V5Q, isn't Norris last season dethroned Max? Quite sure of that. LOL, I think you're saying. Oh, you're saying, you said Max is the best out there, but then you're replying, well, he beat Max last year, so he's not that bad. Oh, absolutely. Clark, Jude outperformed the Lotus race after race. Yeah. Well, Clark, I don't know what you're saying there as well, but I think that's a reply, but I think you're saying Jimmy did a better job than the actual car, race after race. Yeah, I mean, first Clark race I ever saw, 65 International 100 at Warwick Farm. He lost third gear on lap 2 and won the race. No third gear. It's a circuit where you use third about 70% of the time as well. And then there's a big chat going on, Formula 1, 2, 3. By that metric, Button dethroned Kimi, Lewis, Vettel, Alonso and Kubica in 09. Yeah, well, 09. Yeah, that was the year of the double diffuser on the Brawns, wasn't it? Max and Charles are unbelievable drivers, true drivers in Formula 1 that take the car to extreme. Yep, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8. Max, fewer errors than Charles, I would say. Lots of questions and comments coming. Another one. No, we've done that there. That's super chat. Sorry, just going back to the top because we had a bit of a M. Hughes, this is from Max 790, said there were times this year like Monaco when Lewis said to his engineers he doesn't understand how Leclerc could be that fast. He said he couldn't do the same. Is this driver or car issue? Well, as I was saying to Cameron on Monday, if Lewis is asked now, did you underestimate Charles Leclerc? I'm sure he would say, no, I never underestimated him. I mean, he's unbelievably quick, and there were certain things he was doing with the car I just couldn't get my head around, and wow, this guy's great. But I think the reality is he did underestimate him, because he went to Ferrari as a 7 times world champion, having not really enjoyed his last 2 or 3 years at Mercedes, hoping that it would all kind of change, and it didn't. And that in itself says I wasn't really focused on how good Charles was and how good I was going to have to be to beat Charles. And you say, well, why do you say that? Why would he have to think about that? Well, because if he did realize how good Charles was, Lewis would have done more work on his driving over the winter of 24, 25, and he didn't. He put on the long overcoat and the hat and did the picture with the F40, and he wasn't at Snetterton in the wet figuring out why his initial turn-in had changed and what he was doing with brakes against steering going into the rotation point. He wasn't doing those things. He was maybe going to the sim, and maybe he was learning about the Ferrari steering wheel, and maybe he was, I don't know, he was maybe reading a bit of Ferrari history or something. But what he wasn't doing was what he'd never had to do at any stage of his career, which is dig deep and understand why he was slower than George in certain occasions. All the information was there with George. He didn't need to go to Ferrari for that. And I think he went there thinking, yeah, in a new car, new team, I'll be more relaxed. Car will probably be pretty good. I'll be up there with Charles. That's probably what he thought. Big mistake. And yeah, Charles is fabulously quick. And now he's driving in the way Lewis used to drive. And he's doing things with the car that Lewis used to do with the Mercedes without thinking about it. And which, if Lewis was to look at that now on the telemetry compared with Valtteri, he would think, presumably, how did I do that? In the same way he's thinking, how does Charles do that now? Because the guys at that level aren't thinking about what they're doing. They just do it. Max doesn't think about it very much. He just does it. He feels the surface of the road. He knows what he wants from the front end, and he does it. That's what Lewis used to do. It's what Charles does. But actually to see it, when you're in the other car now, and you're taking a slightly longer braking, you're extending the brakes in a straight line, but then you're turning in much wider. and making the corners longer, and you're waiting for the power to come on. Of course, when you look at Charles' telemetry, you're going to think, that's very different to what I'm doing. How's he doing that? That's how Lewis's telemetry would have looked alongside Valtteri at Mercedes. And I've said before, the only way Lewis, I think, is going to get it back, well, two things. One, if the Ferrari is unbelievably good relative to its opposition, with an incredible front end, unbelievable downforce at the rear, totally predictable, fabulous on tyre management, then I think Lewis by default will kind of go back to how he used to drive, and he'll be the Lewis that he was. But I think now it's gone on so long that unless he does go back to Snetterton in the wet, or Bruntingthorpe, or wherever it is, and he works on these very specific things on his driving over a very systematic period of time, and it's got to be in a road car, and it's got to be in a manual transmission road car in which he can really magnify all the errors he's been making. Unless he does that, Charles always going to have him, if the car's not brilliant. Lots of chat going on about Kimi. And now Kimi Raikkonen, that is, only champion once. No one considered Kimi a superstar. Or Max is. Well, I think you'll find a lot of people did consider Kimi a superstar at his time, at his peak at McLaren. And I think, and I did suggest this to Bernie several times, that for the Chinese country only, he have a special Kimi Watch TV channel, which is just Kimi's onboards and a few extra Kimi interviews. I think had he done that and followed my advice, I think Formula One would be much more popular in China even today, because the Chinese absolutely love Kimi Raikkonen. Just the whole way he was, the way he looked, the way he drove, everything about him. But they never did that. And so they lost a massive audience there, in my opinion, potential audience. But Kimi was a superstar. He was, in his own way, he was a superstar. I would never say less than that. This is continuing this chat, this intra-team chat. I can debate Charles is a millimetre ahead of Max by the way he scrubs the Ferrari to unbelievable positions in Monaco. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I think. So what you're really saying there is Max didn't get the best from the Red Bull around Monaco? I think he did. I think around Monaco, the Ferrari was not a bad car at all, and Charles did a brilliant job with it. But I think Max was similarly good in the Red Bull. Hugh says he's very fearful for Lewis this season. Well, yeah, as I say, maybe without any of us knowing, he's been doing all that stuff. Maybe not in Snetterton. Maybe he's been at some little track. Maybe he's been at Croisson-Tournois in France in the wet with a Fiat road car for the last 3 weeks, going round and round and round, just practicing early turn-in, short corners, keeping everything supple, just doing all those things that he can do in a road car that will definitely translate into a Formula One car. Maybe he's been doing all that. We don't know. Let's wait and see. I doubt it. Let's wait and see. Another super chat. What are your thoughts on Anthony Hamilton's new racing series, Hybrid V8? Will it even get off the ground? Lewis to race in it. Well, I don't know anything about it. I mean, I'm not on their mailing list, so it obviously can't be that good. Oops, shouldn't be saying that. I don't know why Anthony wouldn't have put me on his mailing list, because I've always gone very well with him. What's going on? I don't know anything about it. Hybrid V8. Sounds a bit odd. Yeah, why wouldn't Lewis race in it? I mean, if Lewis does race in it, it'll obviously do a lot for the series. I'd love to see, I've been banging on from the start of this live stream about how Grand Prix drivers should be doing a lot more with their time than just driving Grand Prix cars. Tour of Britain for one, and touring the world ambassadors for Formula One for another. So yeah, Lewis in that hybrid thing. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought the world is ready for yet another category of racing, are they? Why doesn't somebody just say, right, what we need is what Peter Windsor has been talking about all these years. We need a B Division World Championship for all the young guys that aren't in Formula One. It needs to be in the previous era Grand Prix cars, supported by the teams technically in terms of spares and parts. And it needs to be at racetracks and countries that are not currently on the World Championship calendar, but do eventually want to be part of Formula One. And it's to give lots of locals in those countries opportunities to race as well, and has separate TV rights, separate commercial rights. and it's a separate championship in its own right, but it's owned by Liberty. Why don't they do that? That's what we need. We need another world championship just below Formula One for all these young guys. There's no testing anymore. And there's lots of countries that want to be in Formula One and either can't afford it, don't have the government backing, and let's help those to achieve that. We don't need more feeder junior formula, in my opinion. Retro Gamer. Take a listen to the WEC engine starting up in the pits. Electric starts to roaring engines. Formula One needs this. Okay. Yep. Well, that's another thing. If Formula One engines don't sound too good and the WEC engines sound great, just as Formula One's paranoid about top speeds and the cars looking to be as quick as they should be in their own minds, they, in theory, will be worried about the sound of them as well. Bit late for all that. They shouldn't really have gone to hybrid engines in the first place, but, you know, let's assume that they can still make some changes. James L. Hi Peter, Aston Martin have to be a dark horse this season. Your thoughts? Yeah, I've been talking about that. I think not only that, I think Fernando definitely win races and potentially a championship. So yeah, don't cut out. I mean, is Adrian Newey for the first time since somebody said, when was the last time Adrian designed a bad car? And I'm just trying to think. You can argue that the 94 Williams first half of the year was not very good, the Eton car. But he does acknowledge that he made somebody made a mistake in some aero deflector positioning at the back of the car, and it had a lot of flick oversteer, I think, that it shouldn't have had, and he acknowledges that. But then very quickly, when they got that right in the hands of Damon, etc., it became a very quick car, didn't it? So that was one. What else? What other bad cars has Adrian designed? You know, from the Leighton House through to Williams, all the McLarens, they're all good cars. So yes, Adrian is capable of, I suppose, of designing a bad car, having a bad car in 26. But why? He's had enough time to build it and design it throughout the last year. So I think it will be a good car. Why wouldn't it be? And he's got Andy Cowell, Honda engines working for him. The whole thing's pretty overpowering, really. Unbelievably impressive. No more chat going on about Kimi now between Racer and Formula. You never watch Kimi in 05. Prime Kimi, you can debate, is faster than Lewis and Alonso, but he's just somewhere who drives the car and has zero knowledge about politics, and that failed him. Well, did it fail him? I think if you would sit on Kimi's veranda now in Zug, wherever he lives in Switzerland over the lake, and watch the sun going down, do you think Kimi's thinking, oh, I failed in Formula One, this is what failed me? I think you'd think, wow, I'm so lucky to have a great Formula One career. Glad I'm out of that now and I can focus on some other stuff. But yeah, I had a great time and everything went as well as it could have gone. I think that's what he would say. I don't think it failed him. I think it wasn't the politics that failed him, actually. If you want to talk about anything that failed him, it was just his own personal physical discipline. And again, I've said a few times, I'm not going to go into details on that, but I think Kimi was at his peak in, as you say, about 05. And then by the time he was winning races and championship at Ferrari in 07, quite luckily, but he did win it, deservedly so from Kimi's point of view, but 07 was a funny year in terms of how good Lewis was out of the box, and Fernando was very quick as well. And anyway, they took points, and so it went on. Kimi in 07 was not as quick as he was in 05, but still capable of winning a championship. So pretty good. And he was enjoying his life a lot by then. Zin Asfar, how would you describe Nico Hülkenberg's career so far? Why, in your opinion, was he never considered for second Red Bull seat? How highly do you rate him? Is he in the Science Junior bracket? I think he's certainly under-delivered. I think he's very talented these days. Obviously, he's very experienced, very professional, classy driver. And good luck to Audi for having him on board, because he's a perfect guy, probably. For them, he's still very hungry, but quite capable of being super quick and very good, for a young guy like Bortoleto to learn from as well. So, yeah, I think he's shown a lot of resilience. at a time. I've got a video out now, I think, one of the ones I've just made public. I don't know where it is, whether it's on community or whether it's on the channel, but look at it. It's an interview with Nico 2 years after, or the year after he won the pole for Williams in Brazil. And he didn't race the following year. He was a test driver for Force India. And I say to him in that interview, you know, how's that year been? And he says, well, you know, basically the first 3 or 4 months were really, really tough. You know, to go from getting a pole and then not racing was crazy. But he's got great strength of character to have done that, to have got through that period of getting a pole and then not racing, and self-belief, self-discipline. If he finds himself in a long-term Audi deal now, which takes him into retirement, then good luck to him. And I hope that's what happens. I've got a lot of time for Nico Hülkenberg. And in answer to your question, if he's at Williams now, would he be doing the same job as Carlos? I don't think he's as quick as Carlos now. And Carlos has got a flair about him that Nico probably would struggle to match. Indeed, I think he struggles to match Bortoleto sometimes. So I wouldn't put him in Carlos's class. But I wouldn't have said he was that far from, well, probably as good, if not better than Albon now. I think certainly Albon's driving, I think, went downhill a bit when he was a bit shocked by what Carlos is doing second half of the year. And Nico, I think, is just got better and better. You know, British Grand Prix was amazing, wasn't it? Peter, how good was a prime Ricciardo? For me, he was the best overtaker I've seen after Mansell and now possibly Max. How would that Ricciardo compare to a Rosberg or Norris? People forget how good he was. Well, yeah, you know, you're just basically underlying everything I've always said, which was that he has got that great quality, TrackCraft. He can see a gap 2 or 3 cars ahead and make it work. He's experienced. He's got the right temperament. He's a lovely guy. He drives well. He's got very supple inputs. Not that short a corner, but shorter than Carlos Sainz, and just a good guy to have for any team to have. And for McLaren to fire him and replace him with Oscar, I think was ludicrous, because I think they still would have won the championship with Lando. Lando would always have been quicker ultimately, and they would have won the championship in a far more harmonious way. And they didn't need Oscar. They just needed to go ahead and do the job. They had the team. And Oscar is quicker than Daniel, no doubt about that. And if you had Oscar in the team, Daniel would have been very good alongside him. Putting aside whether those 2 Aussies would have got on, I don't know about the Aussie. Would have been the same as having 2 Frenchmen in the car. I don't know. It would have been interesting. But putting aside their nationalities, Oscar, Ricciardo, great team. Lando, Ricciardo, great team. Lando, Oscar, you know, that's an irascible team. And why create those situations when it's so simple to keep it as it is? As you say, he was a perfect complement for Lando Norris. And I'd love to, you know, he's probably still capable of doing a very good job, but I suppose his days are numbered now, aren't they, in terms of getting a drive again. Charles and Max, says Formula, are hands down the best overtakers on the grid. It's interesting you say that. I'm sure there's some statistician out there who can prove that, I don't know, Lance Stroll has overtaken more cars in the first 3 laps of any race this year, partly because he's usually on soft tyres or something at the back. Or I don't know, I'm only exaggerating slightly, but there's always somebody out there, a bit of a joker, who's does very well in the first few laps. But Charles, Max, I'd say Max is the better overtaker. I think Charles dirtier and not quite as classy as Max when it comes to overtaking. And you'll say, oh yeah, what about Max in 21? Yeah, I agree, but that was slightly different. That was the World Championship. That was Helmut Marko saying, well, you know, if you both go off, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because you're ahead on points. But the Max we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years, when he hasn't always qualified on the front row, very, very good overtaker. Clean virtually all the time now. He's a matured driver now. Charles, you know, I've still got my doubts about Charles. But, you know, the guy we saw eyeballs popping with that ridiculous race he had with Alex Albon in GP2 in Abu Dhabi, when he was all over the place, filthy overtakes. Is the same guy that nearly took Max out of the Spanish Grand Prix on the straight in 8th gear. You know, Charles needs to quieten down a bit, in my opinion. Yes, he's aggressive. Yes, he's a good overtaker, but he needs to quieten down. And I wouldn't put him in the same class as Max now for that reason. Racer. Lots of inter-chat again. I'm watching this sport since '01. Kimi was like Nico Rosberg. One title was enough for him. Yeah, it was slightly different. I mean, Nico, I don't think was any slower in, was it 16 than he had been in 15, whereas Kimi was. Kimi knew he was getting slower and he knew that it was getting harder to do what he had to do. I don't think Nico felt that. He just felt beating Lewis Hamilton doesn't get any better than that. It's like a hole in one in golf, you know, walk off the course once you've done it. And I've beaten Lewis in the same car, same team. Yeah. How am I going to beat that time to stop? Difference, I think. Peter, Carlos Sainz has revealed that his father wanted him to join Audi and not Williams. He said his father believed Audi was a better option for the long term. I seem to remember you saying similar. Well, absolutely. I've been saying that from day one. I still say it. I don't understand why he didn't. And yeah, I did speak to Carlos Sr. a few times. We do talk quite a lot and we'll communicate WhatsApp. And I think he was in agreement, 100%. I'm not sure if I mean, maybe we both thought the same thing at the same time. I don't know. But I always felt that there was no downside to going to Audi because they were at the bottom of the grid anyway. So they can only get better, which is the truth because now they've got guys like Jonathan Wheatley there. Secondly, Audi's a great brand to be with. Even if the team's never going to be a championship winner, Carlos Jr. could forge a career as an Audi ambassador for the rest of his life, which is no bad thing. And thirdly, he was always going to have, at that point, Nico Hülkenberg in the other car, and it would have been a really good combination. Carlos Sainz, Nico Hülkenberg. And I don't know why he didn't do that. I still don't know why he didn't do it. Why would you go to Williams, which has got sort of very vague future in terms of who they are, who owns them, where they're going, what they do, what they feel about heritage. I mean, they don't involve any of the Williams family. Nothing makes sense there. You know, Jenson Button's there, but it's not as if Williams was his, you know, his team. I know he was there for a bit, but you know, it's not what you remember Jenson for. And nothing makes sense at Williams to me. And there he is driving for this team and doing a good job. Yeah, but he could be doing the same job at Audi now and enjoying himself a bit more. I think have a bit more security as well in terms of his future. But no, and I think his dad's 100% right. So good. Thank you. Right. Dillstar 22. Peter, I'm excited for the 21-26 season. I'm interested to see which drivers improve their driving standards, especially how the cars will be. I think that's the interesting part for me to see. Well, somebody, another viewer emailed me not so long ago saying it's going to be interesting this year because there's going to be so much stuff going on with the strategy and the push to pass and the active aero and this and that and harvesting the engine power and blah, blah, blah. Will the drivers have any time actually to drive the race cars anymore? Or do Liberty actually want them just to go to driverless cars? Is that what it's all about? Well, I don't think it's that, although, you know, anything could happen in the future. Let's hope it doesn't go that way. But it's quite a good point, isn't it? If there's so much stuff that you've got to think about in the race, what does it mean for guys like Max Verstappen? Well, it means, of course, a big advantage for him because he drives the car so well and he's so harmonious with the car. And everything he does is so correct that he actually has, without even thinking about it, he actually has more mental capacity to be able to think about strategy and power harvesting and time management and active aero and push to pass. He's got a big capacity for that purely because everything is so instinctual, instinctive. Instinctual actually is another word. I didn't think it was an English word, but it is. Instinctual is more long-term overall, whereas instinctive is more immediate reaction. I didn't know that. I had to look that up yesterday. Anyway, in Max's case, I think it's more instinctive. Whereas other drivers who are driving more on reflex and their pace comes from braking as late as possible, but the tires are going off and they've got to focus on that and then turn in when they get the power right and the back end's flicking a bit. They're going to be focusing more on that sort of stuff, these reactionary drivers, as distinct from manipulative drivers like Max, which gives them less capacity to be able to handle all this other crud that's coming into Formula One. It's an interesting point, that. Because you could say, well, there's so many driver aids now that it's going to hurt a guy with Max's ability. But it could be the opposite. There's so many driver aids, they're so complicated that a guy like Max is going to breeze it. Yeah, let's wait and see. Right. So drive like a maniac. Subaru and others. is eyeing a comeback to WRC under the new cost cap regulations. Hyundai is threatening to leave. What do you think of new strategy by FA to reset the WRC direction? I don't know. I quite like WRC as it is now. Why do they want to keep changing it all the time? It's good, you know, you don't need so many cars in rallying for it to be healthy, in my opinion, because as it is, you know, if you're watching Ogier, for example, on a stage, you don't get to see all of Ogier because there's so many other cars starting and they keep cutting to all the 3 or 4 cars that are on the stage. If they have even more cars, you've got 7 or 8 cars all of interest, it's going to be very difficult to sort of keep on top of what's going on. Rallying's a very different sport. You don't see all the cars together competing against one another. It's against the clock. So I think, and given how good the television is now for rallying with the onboards and the drones, it's very different from how it used to be and all the problems rallying used to have of TV production. It's now almost tailor-made for television. Why faff around with it and worry about, are things right? All you want is a really quick car that looks spectacular. That's exactly what we've got right now. Those Rally 1 cars are just mind-blowingly quick. And I love watching the onboards and I love watching them sideways and the things they can do with them. I just wish they wouldn't change anything all the time. That's my view. And I know I'm probably a lost voice because a lot of people will say, oh, we got to embrace the hybrid this and we got to do that and cost cap. Well, as long as you've got 2 or 3 quick drivers in cars, that's all you need, in my opinion. You know, if I went up to Monte Carlo now, I don't think I'll be able to, but if I did go to the rally, I'd be going for 2 reasons. 1, to watch Ollie Solberg in the Toyota, and 2, to see how Hayden Paddon gets on in the 3rd Hyundai. I think he's driving in Monte Carlo. He's testing anyway. I'd love to see that. And that's just 2 things. I don't want to see lots of different cars and competition and this and that. That's all I want to see. Just relax. Everybody needs to relax in motorsport. They're always so obsessed with more cars, more money, got to make it bigger, bigger audience. And I've been listening to a few golf podcasts recently, and they're going to reduce the number of golf tournaments in the year because great tournaments like Kapalua in Hawaii, and this year it's not being held because of drought, I know that. But they're now saying, well, probably won't do it again because it's very expensive getting all the stuff out there and everybody's a bit rusty. I mean, and only 600,000 people watched it on television last year. And we've got to worry about the NFL and the playoffs. Forget about it. Just do what feels right and is right for the sport. What is pleasurable? And one of the great things in golf is seeing Kapalua on TV, the Pacific Ocean, the beautiful golf course. It's the same in rallying. You know, we've got it. We've got the Monte Carlo rally. We've got the Safari still. We've got Portugal. We've got Sweden, we've got Finland, they're all there. You know, that's a great thing for rallying. Let's just basically not touch too much of it and worry about manufacturers and just keep going. I mean, if rallying dissolves into Rally 2 tomorrow, I won't mind at all. Still really good to watch it. They're still very spectacular. You know, all this stuff about manufacturers having to be involved, I don't get it. I really don't get it. I've never believed it to be the case. I always think you want proper teams competing, not big manufacturers in any. I don't think and I'm only echoing what Eddie Jordan always used to say, you know, big manufacturers are not what Formula One is all about. It's all about race teams. And he's right. Nigel, lost all his assets due to his passion of racing and everyone doubted he was stupid. But luckily he pulled out of a mega season 92 thanks to active aero from Williams. Not sure what all that is about. Didn't lose any of his assets, and he just kept going. But I think you're being complimentary there. It's a bit difficult to tell actually with that point. I think, sorry about that, but yes, he had a big advantage in 92. Yes, he wrung the absolute 100% maximum from that car, and I don't think any other driver on the planet, apart from Ayrton, would have done that. So, yeah, I mean, yes, it was a quick car, but did he drive any better in 92 than he did in, I don't know, 83, 85? No, he was the same driver, just had a decent car. Nigel made his debut in 1980, Austrian Grand Prix, first full season, 81, 82, 83, 84, most of 85, let's call that 5 years. Uncompetitive car, a great Grand Prix driver. And that's Formula One's shame, not Nigel's. You know, Formula One should have realised how good he was long before they gave him a real opportunity. So, okay, Let's go on. Peroni 28. There you go. Interesting. Peroni fan. Peter, what's the take on Ferrari for 26? TBH Ferrari have never adapted well to big rule changes. It's funny, isn't it? People are coming up with all these stats saying, oh, Honda have never done a very good engine out of the box on a new regulation. It's not something I've ever been aware of or necessarily think is true, actually. I think certainly the last iteration of Honda at McLaren was terrible, but that was because it was just badly managed. And as soon as Adrian got hold of it and moved it up to Milton Keynes and reincorporated it into Red Bull powertrain, it became a fabulous engine. And if you think about Honda in 1980 coming in with the V6 2-litre Formula 2 engine, took them about half a season to get the engine right. And then 81, they made the mistake of going with Spirit, I think. But as soon as they put the engine in a Williams, took Williams about 4 races to get it right. So I don't go buy all that Honda stuff, actually, and nor do I buy that Ferrari not very good at big changes. I mean, 1960 to 61, I mean, Ferrari absolutely blitzed the first year of the 1.5 litre championship in 61. So not sure I get that. I mean, Ferrari got problems, that's for sure, and they don't have the building blocks that, say, McLaren have in terms of the next car, this worked, that didn't work, but the regulations are pretty different up and down the car now. So in theory, it's a cleaner sheet of paper. The building blocks are still important, but they're all on the same tires. That's something. We think there's going to be parity with the engines. Maybe there won't, but let's put that to one side. The chassis itself, there's half a chance Ferrari might get it right. Just luck more than anything else, I would think, because they don't have the building blocks, but they shouldn't count them out. The car wasn't terrible at every race last year. So, yeah, I mean, Ferrari, my take is that Ferrari will probably win a race or two this year, I would think. Not a championship, but a race or two. So, so there's that. Yeah, this is all chat between the two of you. I think we need to move on to people who are actually asking, questions for the general public. Peter, the 26 generation of cars will have less downforce. According to your knowledge of the current grid, which top 3 drivers can excel with less grip and more power? Well, we need to be a little bit careful about that. They have less ground effect. And of course it is less downforce, but ground effect downforce and downforce from the front and rear wing are 2 different things, really. And a 1987 Formula 1 car was downforce at the front and rear wing, but no ground effect. Whereas last year's cars, a lot of ground effect, the floor, the hidden stuff underneath the car. So your point is, which top 3 drivers excel with less grip and more power? Well, it would be the drivers with suppleness and feel and surface of the road, harmony, and rates of input. And who would that be? Well, I think one of them would be Max Verstappen. I think another would be Charles Leclerc. And if I had to pick a third right now, I would say George. I'm in my mind, I'm thinking maybe Oscar. But I think George will probably do a better job with tire management than Oscar, if tire management becomes a critical thing, because he's so good with tire management. And I think George has a pretty good feel for all things surface of the road. So lots of chat going on. Daniel, Brazil. Good afternoon, Peter. Good afternoon. Well, if you're in Brazil, it's very early morning, isn't it? Oh, good afternoon for me anyway. Yeah, absolutely right. Thank you. It's now 1:20. Nearly time to stop, I think. Thanks again for all your content. It seems to me you don't rate James Voles or place faith in his Williams revival. Or is it just you think science shouldn't be there? I just think James Voles is another team principal amongst a bunch of pretty good team principals. I don't think there's anything... I mean, he's just doing a good job there, given... It's not him so much, it's more where that team is going, the people who actually own and run the team, and what their vision is of the future. It's more that. I think I'm not in any way trying to be disrespectful to James, but I think you could put a number of team principals in there and they'd probably be coming up about the same result. I just don't understand what Williams is all about. But don't forget, I'm speaking from my own perspective of having known Frank since 1972 and having been a part of the Williams team for many years. I don't understand what it's all about now. So I have a completely different feel for Williams today than perhaps you do, or anybody who's just coming in cold to Formula One and sees Williams for what they are. And so it's not that. I say it's not the James Vowles thing. It's more just the team and what they're all about, and where they're going, and some of the decisions that are made, and the lack of respect for the Williams family, I guess, is another thing, and the heritage. Not real respect for the heritage. I mean, I wasn't impressed with the way they didn't respect Nigel Mansell when he was at the factory when I was there, for example. You know, I thought that was ridiculous. And the lack of use of Nigel properly. I know he's done some Goodwood stuff, but it's all been a bit edgy and a bit half-hearted. Anyway, that's what I feel there. I think James Vowles, obviously, on the pit wall at Mercedes, outstandingly good. Or just you don't think Sainz shouldn't be there? Well, I think Sainz should be at Ferrari. I've always said that, and Ferrari should never have made the mistake of getting rid of him any more than they should have got rid of Daniel Ricciardo at McLaren. And I think having done that, Carlos should have gone to Audi. And I think he would have had a better year in 26, probably even better year in 25. And I think he'd be looking forward to 26 in a very positive way if he was there, in the way Nico Hülkenberg's looking forward to life now. But he isn't. He chose to go to Williams. And I'm still confused as to why he would have done that. You'd probably say, well, where else is he going to go? Well, he could have gone to Audi. And, you know, you don't go to a team just because at that moment it happens to be quicker. You have to take a reasonable view. When you're taking a big hit in your career and you're being let go by Ferrari, you've got to make sure the next move is absolutely right and sets you up for the rest of your racing life. And I just think he would have had a lot more racing future now at Audi than he will at Williams. But then again, you know, maybe suddenly a vacancy will appear in one of the top teams and they'll say to Williams, will you release him and you can run your third driver and a bit of money will be paid and Carlos will go and get a great drive there. But I think he would still, yeah, that probably wouldn't happen. He was in an Audi. That's about the only thing you could say. I guess he's more able to leave Williams to go and to fill a vacancy in a top team, if it happens, than if he'd been in an Audi, or with Audi. But is that a reason? I mean, you can't go around hoping that somebody's going to have an accident and there's going to be a vacancy, can you? Oscar Plada. Back in the days, there were 11 races in the championship and widely cover as today. Even then, the drivers did a lot of extra races. Yeah. It was much better, I think, when the drivers, fewer Formula One races, more races for the Grand Prix drivers outside Formula One. Much healthier for motorsport, because then, as I said earlier, whatever they're doing, they're competing against lesser drivers, if you like, who've then got a proper yardstick. That's why Formula 2 used to be so good, because you'd have Clark, Rent, Brabham, Stewart in the Formula 2 races. And it was such a good thing. Some super chats coming in, new ones. Any funny Alex Diaz Ribeiro story? Lovely live stream as usual. This is from Paulo Suzia. Thank you very much. Well, always had a lot of time for Alex Diaz Ribeiro. And I always respected his Jesus Saves logos on the car. And I have to say, it's not a funny story at all, but the first time I ever opened a copy of the New English Bible, anyway, it's written in modern English, was when Alex Diaz Ribeiro told me to go and buy one. And I did. I just thought, wow, I will. Make a quick March Formula 3 driver he was then. I will do what you tell me. And it was, you know, it was that's a beautiful Bible if you haven't read it. And I always respected Alex for being out there and doing what he wanted to do and what he believes in. Great guy. Great guy. I haven't seen him for years, but I wish him very, very well. I'm trying to think of funny stories with him. Not really. I mean, he was a bit accident prone, wasn't he, from memory? Quite a lot of things happened to him. But he always had a smile on his face, I guess, which probably annoyed everybody else. well, you know, it's not fair. We're not racing just Alex. He's got somebody else with him as well. It was that sort of thing, you know. No, there's the same super chat coming up. So, yeah, good bloke. I also thought it was a bit incongruous that he was with March, actually, for so long. It was a team less spiritual than March. I couldn't think of one. Anyway. So Formula 1, 2, 3. Even if Max loses interest and starts driving mechanically, he will be beaten easily by Lando and Sainz. Not quite sure what all that's about. This is all these comments between one another which make it difficult. So Max Flashheart said 3 more weekends of Oceania Toyota series and it's free on YouTube. Okay, well, there you go. It's on YouTube. So this is the New Zealand series worth watching. It's called Oceania now because I suppose it's including other parts of the region, Australasian region. So there you go. New Zealand YouTube channel, he says. Yeah, very good. Love it. And we had all those, and we talked about... No, it's on a video that I relaunched. Alistair Caldwell talking about the fatal accident his brother Bill suffered at Teretonga in Invercargill, 1966. If you haven't seen that, it's now public. It's very moving, actually. And the punchline to the whole interview, I mean, the throttle sticks open and his little twin cam Brabham goes into the crowd and it's a terrible accident and Bill sadly loses his life. But the punchline is that a few days later, Jim Clark went to his funeral in a town nearby. Not many, I don't think any other drivers went, but Jimmy was there before he flew to Australia for the Australian leg of the Tasman. Amazing. Okay. Max Flashlight says Callie from WRC is in New Zealand and racing in the Oceania series currently. Oh, I didn't know that. So thank you very much. I'm going to have to read that straight away and have a look and see how he's going. Very good thing. That shows that Callie is totally into it. That's what he should be doing. Mega. I can't wait. I can't wait for this live stream to end to go and see what's been going on there. Thank you very much for that. So much going on. It's hard to keep up with everything, isn't it? I mean, I've subscribed to a really good news feed now from Japanese Super Formula, but you think on that news feed, they would have said, oh, by the way, Callie's racing in the New Zealand Oceania. Another super chat here, I think. No question. This is from Bahabish Shayarchandra. No question. Look forward to the season with your insights. Enjoyed your short stream with Cameron on the whole Checo comments. Yeah. Checo saying, still going on about how if he'd had a better car at Red Bull, he would have beaten Max or been world champion or something ridiculous. That guy just only took a reality check and focused on what he's very good at doing, which is he's really good on exits of corners, and just sharpened up a little bit his entries and tried to be a little bit better, bearing in mind he's not going to change that much now at this age, then he'd be very good. But if he goes around thinking he could have beaten Max at Red Bull if Red Bull had favoured him, he's never going to go anywhere. Formula says, I've read that Ascari was an elegant driver, whereas Fangio was an aggressive one. I think Farina was the aggressive one that they always used to fear, being anywhere near Farina. You know, if there was a stone or a brick by the side of the road, stand back. Fangio, aggressive? Yeah, I think he was always on the limit, going flat out, but I wouldn't have said he was dirty. And not aggressive in terms of traffic anyway, and track craft. Scari, elegant? Yeah, definitely elegant. As I say, Dennis Jenkinson, who's arguably the best ever British journalist of all time, always maintained that Ascari was quicker than Fangio. Okay, and this is very good to see. Max Flashard, who's totally on the case. What a guy. Liam Lawson raised 50k for breast cancer at Hampton Downs doing hot laps last weekend. Good for him. That's exactly what should be going on. So Hampton Downs is in New Zealand. There's this series going on, Oceania Racing. Liam Lawson's there and he does hot laps and raises 50k for cancer. Isn't that a brilliant thing? I'd love to see a lot more of that going on. Good on you, Liam. Congratulations for that. Sarah says, hi, you all. I'm a bit late to the party. Nonetheless, welcome, Sarah. Thanks for joining us. So, again, This is, I don't know, maybe apropos something I just said. Formula One, you need to see beneath the surface. Red Bull is a well-oiled machine which only gives cars to Perez just because of its, which only gives cars to Perez just because it is mandated to. The entire machinery is built around Max. Well, yeah, but as I said with Cameron, if they said to Perez, okay, what car do you want? How do you want your car to be? And Perez said, well, I want really good front end, really good traction, really good in the wet, really good braking, really good balance, no flick oversteer, really good on time management. And they said, okay, we'll do that. And they go away and they build the car. I'll tell you what, Max will still be quicker than Perez in that car. So I don't understand that argument at all. So much chat going on between you. That's fine. I don't mind it at all. But I'm just going to highlight the ones of more relevant to us as a communal global group. This is from Wild Goose Media. That's a good name. Fairly new Formula One fan. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge. You explain things easily and understandable enough, even for people just learning how intimate Formula One is. Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. I'm not sure that's true, but anyway, it's very kind of you to say so. Another one. F. Augusto, 1983. Hello, Peter. I was listening to Jacques Villeneuve yesterday talking about Hamilton and was quite shocked, to be honest. It was all negative and quite frankly, hate almost. Do you have any thoughts? Only that Jacques is pretty much, he's a bit like that. He's black and white, Jacques, and he's quite a difficult guy, a lovely guy in some respects. I've had some wonderful moments with him, but very difficult in other moments. And, if you think about the time when he was with Craig Pollock at winning his championship at Williams, he was impossible to interview, impossible to talk to in a normal way even. Everything was, chip on the shoulder stuff. And then he sort of blindly left Williams and did the whole BAR thing for money, and that didn't work. And then he fell out with Craig, and I don't know. He's just a difficult guy. And I can remember for some odd reason, I was having lunch at Simpson's on the Strand, which doesn't exist anymore. But I remember Jeffrey Sykes, who ran the AARC at Warwick Farm, telling me once that you don't get a better lunch than at Simpson's on the Strand. So for whatever reason, I must have just, I don't know, I won something. I don't know how it happened, but I happened to be eating Simpson's on the Strand. I remember my back was to the window and I was on my own and anyway, the phone rang and it was Joanne Villeneuve. And she was basically saying, who I knew obviously through Gilles for many years, she was basically saying, Peter, can you please try and talk to Jacques? He's completely out of control, and we just, he just needs to listen to somebody who hopefully understands what he's talking about with racing. And I did actually follow that up, and it was at the time he was racing in Japan Formula 3, and he seemed okay, but he was kind of still quite difficult to talk to, not really listening to anything. And so I didn't really pursue it because it was quite a difficult conversation with him. And then he went to America and he won all those Atlantic races and he won Indy with Barry Green and everything was great. And he was quite cool then, I thought. He was pretty good guy. No, he wasn't actually. It was the whole Craig Pollock thing was starting, and even then it was difficult. I remember trying to meet Jacques in the paddock at Long Beach. I hadn't seen him really since the days of Gilles, his dad. And I went to the paddock, the former Atlantic paddock at Long Beach, which is a long way from the IndyCar paddock. And I was sort of waited outside walked up and down the Barry Green area, which is the classic former Atlantic, awning with cars outside. Claude Bourbonnais was the other driver, very quick as well. And sort of waited outside and then knocked on the door. Is Jacques there? And the mechanic said, oh no, he's in a meeting or something. And I hung around for a bit. And then Pollock came out and said, I hear you want to talk to Jacques. I said, well, yeah, I just knew his dad very well. I just like to say hello to him. And he said something like, you Peter Windsor? I said, yeah. And he said, well, don't bother to show your face around here again, or something like that. And I said, okay, I won't. That was it. So if Jacques out there knocking Lewis, I think Jacques needs to look a little bit at how he went when he drove for Sauber and a few other teams he did quite later in his career and before he starts knocking people. There's no doubt Jacques was very good. I mean, pole for his first Grand Prix, won the Indy 500, won the Formula One World Championship. We should never take any of that away from him. But he's not very gracious, I think. And that's probably what you're seeing there. Right. So, what are we doing? There's lots of. Whenever Max Flashart says anything, I have to look at it now because I'm very impressed by his knowledge. And it just says British tobacco. That means he's responding to what? What was that to? Another Max. What does that mean? British American tobacco? Does he mean? I don't know. Okay. So. Speedy Monkey says Toyota had zero experience in Formula One. Mika Salo told this. He was one of the only person who worked at Toyota. Also, a lot of language barriers. Well, of course, they had zero experience. It was the first time they're in Formula One, so there's nothing new there. We all knew that, and they were doing it their own way, which is what I've just said. But I respect them for doing that, and they didn't do a half bad job, actually, considering. And I think John Howett did a brilliant job. Excellent team principal. People talk about Christian Horner or James Voles, and John Howett was as good as any of them, and in a strong position today would still do a very good job. So there's a good example of the whole team principle myth, in my opinion. The Christian Horner one is the important one because he saw the talent of Adrian Newey and gave him the opportunity to do what he wanted. In the same way Frank Williams, to his credit, did with Patrick Head. And I remember him saying, it's no longer about us team owners, it's about the engineers. And I'm going to call my company Williams Grand Prix Engineering, Peter, with an E, capital E, don't forget it. So that's another thing. If James Voles renamed Williams Grand Prix Engineering, I'd be quite impressed, I think. Bearing in mind they like to talk about the Williams Formula One team starting in 1977, which isn't true, of course, because it began in 69. But in 77, it's when Frank did reboot, and he did put the engineering word in there. But if they want to start it from 77 and celebrate the big anniversary next year, why don't they call themselves the engineering name again? Formula, he says, I'm sure Christian Horner is one day finally going to enter Formula One with Audi, buying a controlling stake in the team. Not over Jonathan Wheatley's dead body, I would say. That's all I can say. So where are we going? DBY90. Hey, Peter, I see Jack Doohan has ended association with Alpine. Do you think we'll see him back in Formula One? Time cut short. I would hope so. I think he's a good guy, a lot of talent. Mickey's dad is a brilliant guy, obviously, massive talent. Didn't do Mick any good that last test in Japan when he went off 3 times, I think, at the same corner. Degner, 2 in the Super Formula test. But I don't know what happened there. He wasn't allowed to say anything, and I've resisted picking up the phone because I know it's obviously a delicate time right now, but we need to find out what the prospects are. But for me, he's a talent. And I think he was treated very, very badly and very poorly by Alpine, by Flavio Briatore, probably more specifically. William Petu. Hi, Peter. What is your view on Scuderia Ferrari this year? Do you have regards to their PU and where do you expect them to be in the competing order? I think their PU will be all right for the reasons we've been talking about recently, which is that I don't believe if there's one power unit that's lagging behind all the others, I don't believe the FIA will, and Stroke Liberty, will allow that to happen for too long. I think they will come up with a parity thing where they'll try and make sure the PUs are all relatively equal. That's why there's so much discussion at the moment about the Mercedes and Red Bull, Ford apparent, loopholes they found in the regulations to give them a bit more power in the compression ratio. And if that's the case, and they do even things out with a parity change, then I've expressed my opinion. I think that's a terrible thing for the sport, terrible for the purity of the sport, but it's inevitable given the fact that the sport's very driven commercially by a huge commercial rights holder. It wouldn't happen if we didn't have a commercial rights holder in Formula One. It wouldn't happen if Formula One was still run by the teams and the FIA. So anyway, I think I've been going for quite a long time now, and you guys are probably all as much in need of a break as I am. So let's finish with one. Well, somebody who hasn't asked a question we haven't focused on. This is where Abu Dhabi Sorry for the pronunciation. Hi, Peter. Great show as always. Thank you very much. What's with this pathetic testing behind closed doors business? We want to see the technical challenges and how the teams overcome them. That'd make great TV. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And I expressed that in the Cameron thing on Monday, that testing is a real opportunity for Formula One to show itself to the fans in a different way. There's a lot more downtime in testing because mods are being made to the cars. Drivers are standing around with their drink bottles and behind closed doors in their motorhomes, presumably playing computer games or on the phone or something. That's when they could be on a big stage doing lots of really good interviews in front of 50,000 fans. And beyond that, Formula One loves to pride itself on being the pinnacle of automotive technology. And so we want some sort of explanation of what's going on technically. We got a whole new Formula One now. Why don't we explain it to the fans during the tests? What's going on? Why are they all so paranoid about giving away information? They all know what one another are doing within a millisecond of hitting the pit lane. So why not talk about it to the fans? Why exclude the fans from all that? None of it makes sense for me. The one and only time they're testing in Europe, it should be fully open. They should have 50,000 people at Barcelona. They should have big grandstands available. They should have huge screens, interviews, platform, fan zone. The whole thing should be there. And it should be the same in Bahrain. Big opportunity to boost the fandom in Bahrain as well, because we all know that not that many people go to the Bahrain Grand Prix compared with, say, I don't know, the British Grand Prix. So there's another way they can boost things there. And yet they're not. It'll be open in Bahrain, but you know, nobody goes to the Bahrain tests anyway, as far as I can see, locals, that is. Of course, maybe people from overseas going, but I think it's wrong. And I think Yassine B is asking the same question as well about televising of the tests. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. And I just can't imagine what they're thinking. And they must think it's going to be embarrassing for us, so therefore we don't want the public to see us. That can be the only reason, as far as I can see, because what secrets are they going to keep? I mean, once the car's on track, we all know what it looks like, even if it's not the real car anyway. Doesn't change anything. All we want is access to the drivers, the cars, the colours, the teams, the people. Make it a big, fun, fair thing, and they're all testing. Where's the downside? There isn't one. Formula One, I don't know. You've been in a lot of chats, into friend chats. I don't know, but I don't support Frank personally due to how dirty he was with Senna. But that is my personal viewpoint. What do you mean dirty with Senna? Frank absolutely was devoted to Ayrton Senna and the Senna family to Frank. And I think that's a ridiculous comment, actually. I don't know what that is all about. Flashart says Gogomobile. And I think that's the last word is with Max Flashart, who, if there was such a thing as a prize for the best comments, would probably get this one from the live stream. Thank you, Max, for everything. And Gogomobile is the word of the day, I think. If you haven't seen it, there is a picture of Jim Clark in his Gogomobile doing this test. And it is the car that Frank would have driven had he not been so badly injured after that shunt. So there you go. Brilliant. Denise Summerrock, thank you so much for sharing all your interesting stories and valuable insights. I've learned so much since I started following you. I've been watching Formula One since 1980, and we almost have 200,000 subscribers. Yeah, well, 200,000, it seems a lot. It's not a lot compared with a lot of other sites out there who've done much better than I in what they're doing. Although I have to say, in my defense, most of the sites that are bigger than mine tend to use illegal Formula One footage, which eventually will get closed down and or annoy the Formula One people. So I try to be absolutely legal in terms of not using any footage that I'm not entitled to use. And that includes screen grabs from the TV, which is also illegal. You shouldn't be doing it. So in terms of shows that don't use any footage at all, i.e. illegal footage, yeah, I'm quite pleased with the way things have gone. Thank you very much indeed for your support. And it's classic supporters like you that make the channel what it is. So again, thank you very much indeed for that. Yeah, it's been a fun live stream, and we'll be ramping things up as the season approaches in terms of other voices you'll get to hear and to question as well, experts in their own field. That's one thing we're going to be looking at. And in general, obviously, there'll be quite a lot of hype as we get nearer the tests and then the racing to come. So yeah, bring it all on is all I can say. A big thanks to TrackNinja, to REC, to Jetcraft, and of course to OEM Exclusive for their support of this channel, and to you, the viewer, for all your support as well. Stay safe. See you soon.